G'day folks, and welcome to this introduction and overview to For Blau. I'm a Group South, June to December 1942. This is a game designed by Greg Blanchett, with art by Knut Grunitz, and published by Compass Games back in 2015. Now, this has been described as a manageable monster. It has a very big map coverage. There are a number of smaller scenarios you can play, but I'm setting up here for the full campaign. You can see how big this is. It comes with three 22 by 34 inch maps, which you can kind of see in the center here. You've got map A in the north, B in the center, C in the south, and there are two smaller maps which kind of attach. You've got the sort of a map K down here in the west, and I think it's map G down there in the southeast. And what I've done to fit this on the table is I photocopied map G, and I cut out those copies to trim it to size. So basically it just fits on my table. You can see 4 inches of overlap, which didn't quite fit, just showing those two entry hexes and an oil field. So yeah, divisional scale, principally. You have some smaller regiments and battalions, and about 10 kilometers, 6.5 miles per hex. It focuses on that drive south from these starting positions, German offensive, starting here, driving south along the Don River towards Rostov, and then leading into the Caucasus campaign down here in the Caucasus region. So yeah, huge map coverage, focused on that kind of north to south drive. In fact, the rules include this disincentive for the Germans to drive too far, or in fact at all, across the Don River. I'll talk about that in just a moment. So yeah, you've got the Caucasus here. The mountain ranges is kind of the southern boundary. You've got Grozny somewhere down here in the south. There it is, surrounded by all those oil fields. There's an incentive for the Germans to seize those oil fields. They get mech replacements if they can capture those oil fields, which is going to be really important. Units, as I said, principally divisions. You'll notice some of these have combat values: strength 3, 3. The Russians have 1, 3, 1, 2, 6, and so forth. But you also notice these A, C combat ratings. And this uses the old, I think it's Operation Typhoon, Victory in the West style of drawing strength markers for these units when they're activated for combat. So whenever this unit engages in combat, you draw a marker, and its A combat rating means it has a strength of 9. So it's a variable combat strength, and these counters vary. Here's one with an 8, here's one with a 14. So you never know what strength your forces will bring and what strength the defenders will have in those hexes. It, as Greg talks about in his design notes, it alleviates that factor counting. You never quite know, and it creates a more fluid gameplay, which is well suited to solitaire play. So yeah, Victory in the West, Operation Typhoon, may have seen those before, and Greg has re-implemented this in this design. I'm really fascinated by this design. I think it's very, very intelligent. I think Greg's done a lot of wonderful things here. The Russians, you'll notice, they're on the reverse side, or their HQs. They start off uncommitted, and the Germans begin their offensive, and whenever they basically attack Russian units, it activates that headquarters, and you'll place that headquarters will be committed, and you'll place a commitment roll on adjacent Russian headquarters. And that means that HQ will roll to see if these units become activated in the next turn. So the Germans will be thinking about how they can get their offensive going without sort of waking up too many Russians. They really want to emphasize pocketing Russians along the front here in particular, because if they can pocket those armoured formations in particular, they won't return to play. There are a couple of rules to facilitate the return of Russian units to play. The Russians will get their replacement points, and they can replace losses unless they've been pocketed and eliminated. So yes, the Germans will be driving principally, I think, from, you can see the 4th Panzer Army and the 4th Army up in the north here. They'll be driving through here, hitting the Don. Here's Voronezh here, and then driving south on the west bank. You may be able to see all those little stars on the east bank of the Don. If the Germans enter that area, it activates a particular group of fairly strong Russian reinforcements. And yeah, I think the Germans want to avoid that. So that red dotted line continues all the way along the Don to sort of north of Stalingrad, way off in the distance there. And so that's a disincentive for the Germans to push northeast, east. They want to drive south. They want to capture key objectives for victory, and they want to capture those oil fields. Principally. Combat is, relatively straightforward. It uses a basic CRT. It's a D10 based combat system, which I like. It just, again, adds to that. The spread of results isn't too broad. So you can see, for example, in clear terrain, 5-1, the worst that can happen is an A1 DR1 result, so the defender will retreat. The best outcome for the attacker is a DR2. So as long as you can get some decent odds, even at 4-1 in clear terrain, you're guaranteeing a defender retreat. You're guaranteeing an attacker victory. You just don't quite know what. Not a good variation, but not too bad, by which I mean even a bad die roll at good odds won't be too bad for the attacker. So the units have their combat, their strength. They'll have a combat rating, variable combat strength, movement rating, of course, various terrain. This is all clear. It's a very nice looking map. Well done, Knut Grunitz. I mean, the obvious comparison is Stalingrad 42, and I'll make that comparison in a later video, but this is a very nice map. It really illuminates the terrain features without being too overt. Your focus is on your combat units. That's where your attention is drawn. What we have here is rough terrain. There's wooded terrain. Down the south, of course, you would have seen the mountainous terrain. Stacking is, at most 3 combat units per hex, but usually, because there are combat restrictions on stacking, and generally you only have 1 multi-step unit attacking out of a hex, so you don't want to stack any more than 1 out of a hex, unless, I'm going to shift to the north, they have this white band at the top. When attacking, units with that little white band count as a half unit for stacking. So I could stack some of my regiments up here, for example, the Panzer regiments from 4th Panzer. So stacking limitations, which are relevant for movement stacking, but also for combat stacking as well. And in fact, only one multi-step unit can participate in a combat on the defensive side as well. So the defender also doesn't want to stack too many of those together. There are zones of control. Zones of control stop movement. Costs extra to move out of. It's quite interesting. Zones of control don't extend. It's a variable zone of control effects. It doesn't extend over a river during combat, which is something to pay attention to, particularly around this area down here. There are fairly basic supply rules. You're drawing supply back to a supply hex on the map edge. Fairly straightforward there. One of the quirky aspects of the game is the support system. So the Germans basically have to activate their formations, their headquarters, via support rolls. And until they do so, technically these units are unsupported. So there are 2 ways you can manage this. You can roll for support each turn, or you can play with the historical support. Throughout this game, I'll be playing with all the historical options. So I'll be playing with historical levels of support, listed support points on the turn record track, and you use those points to activate headquarters. And again, there are limitations to what you can do there, limitations for the various regions on the board. So you can see here the Voronezh zone, the Stalingrad zone, and there's the Caucasus zone down the south. 3 air zones, basically. And limitations on what you can activate in those regions. So you activate your units, move them about, engage in combat. There's strategic movement, there's rail movement for the Russians, there's sea movement, Black Sea movement for the Russians. Mech units can do special type of movement infiltration, basically 1 hex movement, ignoring zones of control. They can also do a, what's it called? I think it's a maneuver. Is it called a maneuver combat mobile assault? Mobile assault, my apologies. Which is a special sort of 1 unit attack on sort of defenders. There are also rules for overrun. If there is particularly vulnerable defenders in a hex, they can be overran. What else? Yes, I mentioned replacements. There is a very hefty reinforcement schedule. The Russians have a big chart of reinforcements up there. The Germans have a similar chart of reinforcements, which will be coming onto the board. And then there are weather effects. And again, you can roll for weather or you can adhere to the historical weather. So I'll be adhering to historical weather, which will be principally dry, clear throughout the first 26 turns, and it turns to possible mud. So yeah, what I like about this is fairly clear rules. There's the rulebook, about 19 pages of rules. You take the first 2 pages of cover and the contents away. It's about 17 pages of rules. Some novel ideas here, some things to get your head around, such as that support system and the commitment of Soviet headquarters. But by and large, it's a fairly standard hex encounter game, albeit played on a monster scale with these huge maps, which I pointed out earlier. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to playing this, to kind of diving in and wrapping my head around the system. As I said, there's a lot to really like about this system, and I think just on the face of it, I think Greg Blanchett has done a really good job in kind of bringing these ideas together. It's it's wonderful to see a monster game like this without huge rules overhead, something that you can really just dive into. You'll notice along the front as well, these Soviet fortified zones, there are various rules for that. You may have noticed off in the distance as well, those white markers around Stalingrad. These are fortifications under construction. And I think from turn 20, the Soviets can begin to flip those over. It becomes a race for the Germans then to try to get into Stalingrad before those fortifications are complete. So I'll be doing some playthroughs of this, folks, and stay tuned. This is For Blau by Compass Games. Thanks, folks, and take care.